What's worth noting here is the framing itself. The word tricked is doing enormous heavy lifting. In any relationship post-mortem, we tend to retroactively assign motive. But the more interesting question isn't whether Meghan was strategic. Most people who pursue ambitious goals are strategic. The real question is, why was Harry so willing? He was a senior royal with advisors, family, and decades of media experience around him. The narrative that one woman outmaneuvered an entire institution deserves serious scrutiny.
Queen Elizabeth advised Prince Harry to wait a year before marrying Meghan Markle, according to a new biography. Although the future Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle, was initially welcomed into royal circles following the start of her relationship with Prince Harry, his grandmother Elizabeth reportedly expressed reservations. This is according to a new biography of the late Queen by Hugo Vickers. Well, let's get reaction from Charlotte Griffiths. Now, Charlotte, what do you make of this?
Well, I remember at the time, everyone that asked Harry to slow down, including his best friend Tom Inskip, Prince William, and now we find out the Queen, who told Harry to slow down, were immediately cut off. I think he even said to Tom Inskip, "You're dead to me," or something like that. He just was not in the mood to hear it. He didn't want anyone to tell him to slow down. And even the Queen, whose opinion is so valued by the entire country, was disregarded. But of course, I think she was advising him exactly the right thing. I mean, if he'd just given it a year or two, and I think he's starting to wake up to it now. I think he's starting to wake up to how quickly he rushed into it.
This is where the psychology becomes fascinating. Harry had spent his entire life inside a system of protocol, duty, and institutional caution. So when he finally found something that felt like personal freedom and genuine connection, the warnings from that same institution may have felt less like wisdom and more like control. There's a well-documented pattern called reactive attachment, where individuals who've experienced deep early loss, as Harry had with Princess Diana, can form intensely fast bonds as adults. The speed wasn't necessarily manipulation, it may have been grief, finally finding an outlet.
Tom Bower's devastating new book about the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, Harry and Meghan, reveals that the Queen, Camilla, took the view that Meghan had brainwashed Harry, and it seems like she'd convinced him that they needed to marry, and they needed to marry quickly.
Yes, I wonder if it's because she's slightly older than him and she wants to have babies. And he was absolutely determined to have a family. That was the one thing missing in his life at the time. And he was really, really lonely. I do remember how lonely he was. He was just desperate to start a family. And she, being, I think, 2 or 3 years older than him, may have just said, come on, let's just do it. Let's crack on. And then the other thing that's quite funny is that posh people get married 6 months after they get engaged. So they couldn't really wait a year because it's just not what the aristos do. So once they got engaged, it was kind of hell for leather, let's get this done as soon as possible.
Well, listen, you've been writing with great expertise about the royals for many years, Charlotte, in your brief as editor-at-large at the Mail on Sunday, which is #1 for royal scoops. Can you do a little bit of a psychological deep dive on Meghan Markle in regard to this timeline? Do you think that she wanted to get married quickly, A, because of her biological clock, which was ticking, and B, because she wanted to close the deal, she wanted to bag this prince?
This is the most explosive question in the entire video, and it deserves a serious answer rather than just tabloid outrage. Consider the evidence pattern. Within roughly 3 years of marriage, Harry had stepped back from royal duties, moved to California, signed multi-million-dollar deals with Netflix and Spotify, and was positioning himself and Meghan as global progressive celebrities. That's not a coincidence, that's a destination. The more honest question isn't whether this was planned, it's whether Harry was a willing participant who needed someone to give him permission to leave, or a man who was genuinely steered somewhere he didn't fully understand he was going. Because those are two very different stories with two very different villains or no villain at all.
Yes, I should have said before, not that I think the biological clock was the actual factor. I just think that's what she was telling him. And of course he bought it. But I actually think she was love-bombing him, completely love-bombing him, playing along with all their plans at the time, saying, of course I want to live in South Africa, because he really wanted to live in South Africa at the time. She was playing along with that, even viewing houses in South Africa via a WhatsApp group. But actually had no intention of moving to South Africa with him and escaping the press and living a private life. What she always intended to do was go to California, but she had to play along with everything he wanted for a certain amount of time. And there's only so much time she can tolerate not getting her own way, playing the royal game. So I think she wanted to hurry it up for that reason, and also, of course, to close the deal, because once they're engaged and it's announced, then they've got to actually do it. And the other thing she used to do was she used to drop little hints that they were dating. He wanted to keep it a secret that they were dating for as long as possible. And she used to wear bracelets from him and walk around Kensington Palace wearing welly boots to try and get noticed, because she didn't want to keep their relationship a secret, I don't think, because she knew once people knew about it, it was real, it became a thing. So,
well, she's wearing the welly boots because what? Nudge, nudge, wink, wink, I'm off to Sandringham later?
Well, I think it was, yeah, I think it's I'm walking through
country attire.
Country attire in Kensington shows I'm staying at Kensington Palace, I'm walking through that kind of garden.
Right.
I think that's what that was all about. And she did duly get caught on camera in her welly boots. I think it was a fairly sunny day, I don't think it was even raining. But yes, there was some sort of hint. She's very good at symbolism and knowing what makes a good picture.
I'm staying on a big estate with lots of land, nudge, nudge, wink, wink.
Yes, yes, and here I am in Kensington still wearing the boots and wearing a baseball cap, but with her hair very long. And it was very obviously her. She went to Whole Foods in Kensington, which is actually where we all go, we Daily Mail journalists, we all go for our lunch.
Because it's around the corner from the office.
It's around the corner from the office, and it's also around the corner from Kensington Palace. So how clever of her to go for lunch, walk around in circles wearing her welly boots.
Going into
lunchtime.
If you go into the Whole Foods in Kensington, South Kensington, you are going into the Lion's Den journalistically.
I mean, it's the Daily Mail canteen. It may as well be the Daily Mail canteen. So yes, she's certainly going to the Lion's Den, and of course she got caught, and the pictures came out, and then finally their relationship was properly exposed.
Now you're suggesting that she leveraged or even weaponized her biological clock to marry Harry quickly.
I do think that. It's just my opinion. Yes, I do think. I think she leveraged anything she'd get her hands on at the time to marry Harry quickly.
This is one of the most strategically intelligent moves in the entire story if it was indeed deliberate. Using the biological clock as leverage is brilliant precisely because it's unanswerable. Harry couldn't argue with biology. He couldn't say, let's wait 3 more years, without feeling like he was robbing her of motherhood. And for a man shaped by guilt about his mother, guilt about his royal privilege, guilt about his own happiness being positioned as the obstacle between a woman and her dream of having children would have been psychologically unbearable. It's also worth noting, Meghan had been previously married. She knew what commitment looked like. She wasn't a naive romantic, she was a woman who had done this before and understood exactly what levers moved men toward the altar.
What do you mean by love bombing?
She absolutely played to all his weaknesses. You know, he was very lonely at the time, and she said, look, I'll fulfill all your dreams. I'll protect you from the evil press. Let's run away together to Africa. But he did love bomb her as well, because on their 3rd date, he took her to Africa, to Botswana, which is pretty extreme for a 3rd date, I'd say. But any misgivings she had about the royal family or British life or opening swimming pools in Doncaster, you know, she buried all those, I think. But as soon as she got married to him, of course she was never going to go and do the ribbon cutting that's the bread and butter of the royal family. She was going to go to California and be a star. That's all she ever wanted. And she wanted the fame. And I think she buried that as well. I think she made him think, oh no, I don't want to do interviews with Oprah. But of course she did.
Love bombing is a term that originates in narcissistic relationship psychology, and it's worth being precise about what it actually means before applying it to a public figure. Genuine love bombing isn't just enthusiasm or passion. It's a deliberate, sometimes unconscious pattern of overwhelming someone with affection to create dependency and fast-track commitment before the other person can think clearly. Now, here's what makes Harry a particularly vulnerable target for this dynamic, if it did occur. He lost his mother at 12, spent decades feeling like an outsider within his own family, and by his own admission struggled deeply with his mental health and sense of identity. That is textbook vulnerability to an intense, all-consuming relationship. When someone finally makes you feel chosen, seen, and prioritized above everything else, especially when your whole life has been defined by duty over personal happiness, the pull is almost irresistible.
Do you think her plan ultimately was to bag a prince and ship him off to the United States?
Yes, I do think that. And I remember when they were dating, long before they were engaged, a friend of theirs said, By the way, they're moving to California. They're moving to Malibu, it was at the time. It wasn't Montecito where they ended up. And this was before they were even engaged. They were absolutely convinced that Meghan's plan was to move them to Malibu.
That they planned to move to the United States whilst they were dating, or at least Meghan wanted to do that.
Meghan wanted to move to Malibu, and they discussed Malibu. That's what I was told at the time when they just started dating.
So Megxit was almost, you know, being sort of hatched as an idea long before the wedding.
I think so, absolutely. And that would explain why they invited Oprah Winfrey to their wedding, because they were always planning to do the Megxit and the big reveal and the big interview. I think it was always part of the plan. They maybe even settled it before they got engaged.
Meanwhile, we are hearing today that Harry, the Duke of Sussex, hopes to be reunited with the royal family this summer on the Sandringham estate. This is a Sun story. What do you make of this?
This is perhaps the most humanly compelling part of the entire conversation because it suggests that beneath all the Netflix documentaries, the memoir, and the transatlantic drama, Harry is still a son and a brother who misses his family. That's not spin. That's just human nature. But here's the strategic reality that any reconciliation has to navigate. Harry has made public accusations about racism, about neglect, about institutional failures that cannot simply be walked back over a private dinner at Balmoral. The words exist. The book exists. The Oprah interview exists. Reconciliation in private doesn't erase the public record. The more pressing question is, what does Meghan think about a reconciliation? Because if the marriage is as unified as they present publicly, Harry doesn't move toward his family without her blessing. And if she is, as the video suggests, the architect of the distance, then any genuine reconciliation represents a significant shift in the power dynamic of that marriage. Watch this space. Because if Harry does reconcile, even partially, it will tell us more about the true nature of that relationship than any interview ever could.
This is a classic, because I've been on the other end of this. This is a classic example of Harry deciding he wants to do something, revealing it to all the papers, and then it sort of happens because the king is bounced into it. And I think that's what he's trying to do here. He's trying to bag himself an invite to Sandringham during the summer, although the king tends to go to Balmoral during the summer, but I don't know how he's going to manage that one. But also at the same time using his kids as leverage, saying, but I'll only come. Not that he's had an invite. I want an invite, but I'll only come if the kids can come. And I don't think this summer the king will be in the mood for any of this. There's too much going on. He may or may not be going to the States to see Trump. There's a Middle East war going on. I just don't think that this game, which he has now played out 2 or 3 times in the last year, I just don't think Charles will fall for it.
Do you think it's a no from the king? Harry wants to unite with his father and the king says no.
I think so. I think the king does want to unite, but I know he hates being bounced into it, using the Sun, you know, and it's on the Times as well.
So was Harry a victim of a contract marriage? The honest answer is we don't know yet. And we may not know for years. Because here is the thing about contract marriages, the ones where the terms were never explicitly spoken. The truth only becomes visible at the end. If Harry and Meghan are still together in 20 years, building something genuinely meaningful and equal, this entire theory collapses. But if this marriage ends, particularly after Harry has been completely separated from his family, his country, his titles, and his identity, then what looked like a love story will look, in retrospect, like a transaction that only one person fully understood. The contract may not have been signed, but the price has already been paid. Do you think Harry went into this marriage with his eyes open, or was he too emotionally vulnerable to see clearly? Tell us in the comments. Subscribe for commentary that goes beyond the headlines and into the truth underneath them.